Webinars are co-hosted by the National Association of Asian American Professionals, NAP, the Asian Leaders Alliance, ALA, and the Asian Business League. This month, we have Peter, you will be leading the webinar.
I think we might have lost John.
Excuse me?
Okay, you cut out there for a second, John. Sorry.
Okay. Let's see. Hopefully I'm still here. I'm still in the middle of your introduction. But Peter is currently in Seattle, just moved back from Asia. He used to work for Flextronics, spent over a decade at Oracle, and is a founding partner of Equity Residences LLC. As a former Bain Case team leader, also worked at IBM, and holds an MBA with honors from UCLA, a BS from Berkeley, and a master title in chess from the International Chess Federation. Peter served on boards of nonprofits in the US and in Asia, and has lived and worked in Hong Kong, China, Australia, and the US. He has he quoted during his MBA commencement address, and that his favorite sport is anything in the water, like surfing, kayaking, and swimming. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Peter Yu to lead his presentation, Global Career and Business Strategies plus Pandemic Pivots.
Thank you so much, John. And
all yours.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here. I wanted to, again, give my gratitude to John, and also for Judy, my friend who's on, who connected me to this opportunity to speak to all of you today. So first of all, welcome. Good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides I put together to talk about, career strategies, working globally, and then even talk about the current pandemic and how that's reshaped a lot of companies in terms of their business models. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's do this, that. And then when I go into presentation mode, I just want to make sure, can everyone still see the slide? All right, well, if not, just speak up here. Let's see. Please move this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going, and I'm sure the moderators will interrupt me if something is not working properly. Okay, so let's first talk about career strategies, because I think before you think about global career strategy, you probably want to have some foundational career strategy. And then the third agenda item will be some observations I've had on differences between working in the US versus abroad. And then the fourth one would be tried and true business strategies. These are strategies that are probably going to work better if you're working internationally or globally. And then finally, pivoting amid the pandemic, both from a company standpoint and also, even nonprofit organizations and other companies, what different industries are doing. So first of all, like I said, it's important to have a, sort of a career strategy first before you get into sort of a global career strategy. And from my perspective, the strategy that I've been following is, I've always liked to learn about different functions and learn to do different things. My goal is to become CEO of a substantial organization someday. And I think one good way to sort of reach that goal is to gain experiences in all the different functions, business functions, that a CEO would typically have to lead. So as I share a little bit more about my career background, hopefully you'll see some of those themes emerging. And it's, it's something to consider. It's not everyone, there's, more than one way to skin a cat. And I'm not saying it's the end all be all in terms of a strategy, but it's something that I've pretty much stuck to. And then, people like to use the word strategy a lot, let's strategize. So, I think it's important for us to take a step back and say, what is strategy? Now, as John mentioned, I played a lot of chess, so I'd like to think that helped me develop some sense of what strategy is, which is partly true. And I also used to work in strategy consulting. And in my current role, I'm also, I carry a chief strategy officer title. So from a business standpoint, I've obviously been exposed to and been responsible for driving strategy. So it's very important to make sure that we all define and we are all clear on what is strategy. Interestingly enough, I actually asked my first round interviewer when I was still an MBA in my final year at UCLA, and I was interviewing for strategy consulting firms. So I asked my first round interview at Bain, so what is strategy, right? And he gave me an answer. He said, strategy is about choice. It's about making a decision with constrained resources. Strategy and making choices would be easy if we were always in an environment where there was unlimited resources. You wouldn't have to trade off and prioritize. But in reality, we know that there's always constrained resources. So then with those few resources, what do you choose to focus on? And that's what strategy is. And so I just wanted to, sort of say that as a backdrop before we continue talking about a global career strategy. And then the third thing to think about is, how do you develop or hone strategy? Sorry for the typo there. I didn't proofread this before showing this, so this is my bad. But how do you, develop or hone strategies? So one way is to obviously leverage frameworks, right? Use frameworks to think about to make sure you think through your options. Frameworks are meant to help you, frame a problem so that all the pieces are there, okay, that you're not overlooking some component. And in strategy consulting, we call this MECE, M-E-C-E, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. So you put that together, those are like your universe of options. And then if you can evaluate, one at a time, either based on quantitative benefits or whatnot, and then you can pick the best, course of strategy. So frameworks are very helpful. And, there's many frameworks with 4 P's of marketing. There's, the 3 C's framework, so on and so forth. There's the BCG, growth matrix with the stars and dogs and cash cows, et cetera. The other key aspect of thinking about strategies and honing your strategic thinking is using data. And that's an area where, the world, we tend to get better and better at, collecting, analyzing, using technology to look at data. But also there's also more and more maybe bad data out there. So, that's an area that you definitely want to leverage data if it's available. Sometimes it's not, especially in the startup world. But between frameworks and data, that's how you can really think carefully about critical strategic choices. And hopefully today I'll introduce some frameworks for you, so you can apply in your career thinking throughout your life. And then in terms of data, I think I'm only going to be able to give you anecdotal data based on my personal experience. So let's get off of this slide. So the first thing I want to do is just talk again a little bit about career strategy and some things to keep in mind when you think about your career. So by way of introduction, I want to give you a little more background on myself. This slide talks about my pre-MBA experience, okay? So why did I put opportunity begets opportunity? So I did my undergrad at Berkeley, okay? One of the things I did, I guess it might have been early junior year, is I volunteered for an event that Apple had on campus. It was called the Straight Talk about Mac computers. It was called Student to Student Straight Talks about Mac computers, and it was an exhibit that we had in Poly Ballroom, basically like a fair where Apple would encourage people, usually in the Berkeley community, who were using Macs for various things, desktop publishing, animation, other things, and basically set up booths where you can, if you're an expert in desktop publishing, like I was at the time, I was the publisher and editor-in-chief of the State Chess magazine. I would go there and I would talk about how I use my Mac to produce this subscription-based magazine, and using what software I used and how easy it was to drag and drop. So after that, Chevron, when I applied to Chevron, they saw this. They didn't know it was just a volunteer unpaid thing. But that really caught their attention because, one of the evaluators was in charge of the Mac users group for Chevron Park, the facility in San Ramon. So that gave me an opportunity to do a 6-month co-op internship at Chevron, which, they actually pay you a decent amount for that time. And then you actually get some credits too, but you have to sacrifice taking a semester off. After the experience at Chevron, that made it that much easier for me to get a job, another internship, my last summer before graduating, with IBM. And then so I ended up graduating in 1992. Okay, I know that's ancient history for many of you. Maybe some of you weren't even born yet, but in the early 90s there was a recession. Okay, and so actually, if you graduated, in 91 or 92, you pretty much were graduating into a recession. But fortunately, because of my internship at IBM, I was able to get a full-time job. So I just felt that, that whole string of events, it wasn't necessarily planned, but it was like, the volunteer experience with Apple really opened the doors for when I applied to Chevron. And then, those combined experiences opened the door for when I applied to the internship for IBM, which then led to a full-time job after employment, despite many of my my peers not being able to get jobs straight out of college because it was a recession at that time. So that was sort of, that's something to keep in mind. Opportunity opens other opportunities. Okay. Second thing is you are your own CEO. So this may be well known to everyone now, and I apologize if I'm preaching to the choir, but I would say up until the early 90s, and certainly in the 80s and before, a lot of times, a career goal is to really graduate college, go join a solid big company, work your way up, and then, in 20, 30 years, you retire with a nice pension, with a nice, gold watch, from your years of service. And, meanwhile, you've had sort of a rich, set of experience because it's a large company. You got to do a lot of different things, maybe even travel, et cetera. Right. So that was like my thinking, very, I would say, old school when I was graduating undergrad, and I joined IBM, which at the time was Business Week, Bloomberg Business Week, for those who remember that publication. Business Week #1. So they had a Business Week 1000, just like Fortune 500. And IBM was known for a few tenets, respect for the individual, employment for life. Well, IBM, which for the longest time never laid off anyone, and people could basically count on some opportunity because it was always doing well. It was a large company. People could count on having a career there. But when I entered, I saw that basically IBM had its first round of voluntary layoffs, right? People who might be close to retirement can take a payout and retire early. And it was really the beginning of, all companies just really looking out for themselves, okay? And this was obviously in the works, but, even strong companies like IBM couldn't, maintain like having a no layoff policy forever. And that taught me, that, hey, you know what? The companies are not going to really necessarily care about you or developing you. I mean, they do, okay, but to an extent, you really have to help yourself, right? Companies will help people who help themselves, frankly, right? So essentially, you have to think about your career where you're the CEO, of You Incorporated, YOU, and what experiences, what brands, what exposure or industries does it make sense for you to accumulate over time, so that you can be best positioned to get your dream job or your dream position, whatever your career goals are. Okay, so that's the second point. Number 3, brand is important. So this is interesting because after IBM, I went to McGraw-Hill. Some of you may remember that as your textbook was published by McGraw-Hill, but when I was at McGraw-Hill, it was a very large conglomerate. It owned S&P 500. It owned the Business Week. It owned software companies. It owned the testing, the standardized tests, as well as your traditional, educational textbook publishing, which it still does today. And at the time, my company had, like many companies, larger companies, they have tuition reimbursement if you want to take, some continuous learning at night. The company will pay for that. So, I thought, okay, well, why don't I do that? My second line manager, who was the CFO for our division, or the McGraw-Hill School Systems Company, had just gotten his MBA part-time at the local Golden Gate University branch. And then, so I started taking classes at night there. And I loved it, and I never expected that I would actually want to go back to school, because I can tell you, Berkeley is not a walk in the park, right? When I graduated, into a recession, I didn't have very, high regard necessarily for the value of degrees, because there were people that, were like well-educated Wall Street bankers, holding up "will work for food" signs. And I just been through, a lot of studying. I said, hey, that's it. I'm done with school. I'm never going to go back. But after a few years, I started, taking these Golden Gate University MBA classes at night, and we had good teachers. We had a PhD from Ohio State. We had a Harvard MBA, that taught marketing, and I really got into it. And then I remember, so why do I keep saying brand is important? I remember we did a case study. Business schools always use Harvard case studies. A lot of them do. And for those who study history, in the 90s, Intel had an issue in the early to mid 90s. Intel had an issue with its Pentium chip, where there was this floating point calculation, where it was miscalculated by the smallest of fractions. But if you can imagine, for computing applications, on a massive scale, a small miscalculation could lead to serious, issues. And the way Intel actually handled it, it was like the textbook approach to not to handle a crisis. Okay, it was like they did at every step, they did the worst thing that you could do in corporate crisis management. They first denied it, and they underplayed it, and then like finally they owned up, and it was a comedy of errors. Okay. The interesting thing is Intel still went on to do very well as a company. Okay. And a lot of consumers were I guess they were fine with sort of forgiving this situation. And for most companies, this could have been the death knell. But it became evident, and this is one of the many learnings with the case study. For that case study was because Intel had a very strong brand going in. Okay, it had done a lot and invested in its brand, and then after the problem was over, it resumed this sort of brand investment. And because of a strong brand, people were more willing to forgive its transgressions of the past. And then it made me realize, actually, hey, brand is very important. If I'm really gonna, if I want to think seriously about an MBA, maybe I should consider, the brand of the MBA. Okay. And around the same time, I met a mentor. So this is the fourth bullet. Look for mentors. This is very important to have mentors throughout your career. It turned out, we actually I was working in Monterey. All right. McGraw-Hill had two divisions there. We had McGraw-Hill School Systems, which is a software division. And then we had McGraw-Hill CTB, which stands for California Testing Bureau, that does many of the nation's K through 12 standardized tests. And it was a much larger business, actually. Well, the president of that division was a Korean American. And this is in 1996, okay? So you can probably imagine that, unfortunately, there aren't like, as many Asian Americans that are presidents, within Fortune 500 companies today, but 20 something years ago, there was a lot less. Okay. His name was David Cho. Okay. And obviously it was the first time I saw an Asian American in that senior position. I naturally, looked upon him as a mentor. And I had the opportunity to, chat with him, find out how did he get to where he is. Right. And he told me that, well, he went and got an MBA for Columbia. Okay. And then he went and joined, he took a management consulting role with Coopers and Lybrand. So you're thinking, who's Coopers and Lybrand? Sounds familiar. Coopers and Lybrand is the C in PwC, because Coopers, Lybrand, Pricewaterhouse merged and became PwC. So anyways, David told me that, the great thing about a career or working in management consulting is it's like dog years. Okay. 1 year management consulting is like 7 years in industry, because you get to work with different clients in different industries, you solve different problems, and when you're ready, if you do a good job at the end of each engagement, the clients actually want you to stay, so they'll make you an offer, right? And when you're ready to sort of parachute back into a more cushy Fortune 500 job, as opposed to a very hectic management consultant's life, you can just do that, and then you'll land probably at a more senior role than if you just stayed and worked your way up within that Fortune 500 company. So I thought, wow, what a great idea. I never really had a career plan. I was starting to rotate around from finance into operations at that point in McGraw-Hill. But and I was starting to learn more stuff about business because of the MBA classes at night. But what David told me, I thought, hey, I've got to follow this path. This sounds very interesting, right? So that's why I combined with sort of my thought about, hey, maybe I should take the MBA thing more seriously and focus on a brand. I learned that basically if I wanted to do management consulting at a well-known firm, and I'm already a few years out of undergrad, then the way to do it is to go get an MBA and then once again participate in the recruiting cycle. So that's what led me to UCLA Anderson. And the last bullet here, key lessons when you least expect it, really relates to my one of my many lessons learned at Anderson. So many people talk about leadership. Many people talk about, oh, I want to get an MBA because I want to learn to be a leader, or maybe not many, but some people do. And many business schools also, market that they're good at teaching leadership. Okay. Now, I wasn't one of those looking to learn leadership. I told you I was going in because I wanted to, get good grades so I can compete for, a strategy consulting role on the way out, and then follow this sort of career path that David sort of turned me onto. And then, but the way that we had to do that at UCLA at the time was, we didn't have a great reputation as MBA students there for doing well on these case interviews. So when you interview for strategy consulting firms like Bain, McKinsey, BCG, whatnot, the interviewers, these case interviews are known to be quite tough. You're supposed to answer, vague business questions, and then, keep sort of trying to answer and come up with a solution based on limited information. So I wanted to pull my colleagues, my fellow classmates together, and to up level ourselves in terms of our case interviewing capabilities. I did that by organizing career nights where we could meet alumni who went into management consulting. I organized mock interviews. I helped our Management Consulting Association put together the case book so people can study and find out what past case questions were given. And basically, kept practicing, right, with folks. And, this sort of drive, this passion and vision definitely helped people who were already on the bandwagon to do strategy consulting out of business school, but it also helped a lot of people who really didn't have a set plan. They were either on the fence or they were like very, open-minded, but they just thought, well, Peter was like so gung-ho about this, why don't I take a look, right? And it just really uplifted the whole school so that, what UCLA Anderson has is at the end of each school year for the graduating class, they are asked a few weeks before commencement to nominate one of their classmates for the Dean's Award for Outstanding Service. And it's a completely peer nominated award. And I actually nominated one of my classmates. He nominated me, and apparently both of us had enough nominations that the school that year decided to give us, to give two winners in our graduating class. So what I learned from that experience was that actually I wasn't really setting out to do this, but my classmates looked on what I did as leadership, and that it helped them focus in on a potential career path. It helped them prepare and succeed. Okay. And it really just motivated people to do even better. But what I felt I was doing all along is I was actually serving, my fellow classmates by helping people, right? And also in turn, it helps me. So I really learned that leadership is about service. Okay. And you've probably heard many of these sayings before, how you want to I think they said, follow from the front, and, elected officials are supposed to be, they're supposed to serve their constituents, right? So if you think about it, leadership is really a situation where your followers have to give you permission to, to lead them. Okay, they want to follow you, right? And you do that by, by giving everyone, by serving everyone well, by doing something that's actually in their interest. So this is something that I've always, service leadership is something that I learned from Anderson. I didn't expect to learn that. It's something that I've kept as I've led, increasingly large teams throughout my career. And it's something that, that I think still guides me to this day. And I think, probably some politicians can use a brush up on service leadership, and I'll just leave it at that. So let's now, leap into to the global arena. Post MBA, I've worked at Bain, Gateway, Oracle, Flex, which is now the rebranded Flextronics, and currently Zekin, which is actually a startup. It's actually the first, Zekin's really the first startup job that I've had, but I figured that while I've still got some gas left, before I get to retirement age, I better give this a go, because I've seen so many people be very successful taking, the startup route. So, that was something, just like living and working abroad, it was something that the experience I savored for. So that's sort of why I am where I am now. But when thinking about making a leap abroad, I want to say that, you can have several careers in your life, but you only live once. So make life choices that you won't regret. What drove me to take my first international opportunity was because I thought about, I had opportunities to work in LA and San Francisco. This was, in early 2000, late 1999. So it was before the dot-com crash, right? But I realized that, what, if I don't take this opportunity to work, at the time was in Australia, I may never again, get such a seamless opportunity to work and live overseas. The company was going to relocate me. They're going to give me 4 trips back a year. They're going to help me with the tax and all kinds of stuff, right? So I thought, if I don't take this, I'm going to regret it, right? If I never live and work overseas again, I'm going to regret missing this opportunity. So you never want to, that's a big fear factor. I don't want to live with regret. So that's number one. Number two, even great decisions cannot escape the occasional black swan. Okay, so I think this goes without saying. But when you're hit with when you're caught in one of these, the global financial crisis, COVID more recently, it's okay. Take one step back, but you're going to end up taking 2 steps forwards later, right? So don't get discouraged. I think there's always, again, more than one way to skin a cat. Now, global mobility from a company's perspective, this is where at Gateway, it was very interesting. Gateway was at a stage where it was trying to turn around. I joined it to help it successfully turn around from several years of losses. And it was starting to have success growing in Asia and Latin America, which was the markets I led. So much so that Gateway wanted to increase the presence of its employees in Asia Pacific and out of their APAC or JPAC headquarters in Tokyo. Okay, and I had already moved back to the U.S. I worked for Gateway at its headquarters in San Diego and then in Irvine. But for some reason, after doing a stint in Australia with Bain, I started getting the bug to want to go overseas again, right? And from Gateway's perspective, a company a U.S. company typically will have 2 options. They can hire someone local who knows the market, but doesn't know the company's jewels and how the company operates and its culture, okay? Or they can dispatch someone from headquarters to the overseas market who this person knows everything about how the company works, but they don't know the local market that well, right? So a lot of times companies will choose dispatching someone, okay, because they can always bring the person back, and that person can also train others that are hired locally. So that's essentially what Gateway did. Okay, I just wanted to. So Gateway had actually approved my move to Japan, and then I was going to just focus and major in Asia Pacific instead of both emerging markets, Asia Pacific and Latin America. But it was interesting because we were meeting customers, with our Gateway CEO and my manager at the time, and we saw various retailers, Japanese retailers. Our country manager translated what they were saying, and one of them asked, "When are you going to hire more Japanese for your local Japan office?" Because it was a sign of loyalty and commitment to the market if we did that. So as soon as I heard that, and as soon as our CEO heard that, and I knew my move was off. Even though I was on my house hunting trip, that was it was not gonna happen. So sometimes you get what you want, and sometimes you don't. The key is to not necessarily give up, but just be open to new opportunities that may emerge. And that's what happened at Oracle. When I joined Oracle, I didn't expect to move overseas again. I knew it was very much focused. The role I was taking is focused on North America, and it was a good role. But it just happened that opportunity knocked, and that opportunity was open to me because I already had prior experience living and working overseas. So one of my second line managers, direct reports, he got promoted to VP, and then shortly he decided to transfer from facing North America to running strategy and business development for Oracle Asia Pacific. And then I congratulated him and I said, "Hey, keep me in mind when you're building out your team." And he said, "Yeah, thank you very much, and sure, I will." And then sure enough, 4 months later, he pinged me and said, "Hey, were you serious about being interested in working in Asia?" And I said, "Yeah, I've lived and worked overseas before. I speak some Mandarin. At the time it wasn't as good as it is now, right? But those were proof points that it was much less risk for him to sort of get me out there. And then I ended up spending 7 years with Oracle in Asia Pacific. So it was enough for me to get my permanent residency in Hong Kong. And then I switched to Flex over there because after some time, I wanted to focus on, I wanted a global remit, not just an Asia Pacific remit. And this subsidiary of Flextronics called Moltech, it was headquartered in Hong Kong. So the CEO's in Hong Kong, the CFO's in Hong Kong. So it was a good opportunity for me. But opportunity knocks, and because you broadened your career horizon to include international opportunities, then you're better positioned to get those. Now, I'm going to try to pick up the pace, otherwise I'll never get through the rest of my slides. Some frameworks. I promised you some frameworks. So to maximize, whether it's global or just any move, but key success factors, certainly for a global career, maximize your success probability and minimize risk. What do I mean? If you look at this stool, it's a four-legged stool. Let's say one leg is function, accounting, marketing, supply chain, etc. Let's say another leg is industry, finance, technology, healthcare. Let's say a third leg is company, okay? And then let's say the fourth leg is geography or market, okay? So now you're seeing where I'm going. So obviously, within your existing company, you can change functions, okay? Maybe if you have a large enough company like Amazon, you could change industries. So you can go from Amazon's, consumer business to, its B2B side or something, okay? But basically those four legs are your pivot points. So when you change jobs, you can change jobs within a company, you can change companies, have the same type of job, or you can have everything the same but change markets like I did. You want to minimize the number of pivot points, because the more you're pivoting on, if you're pivoting on 2 or 3 of the legs of that stool, chances are you're going to fall over. So when I moved overseas, I was still with Oracle, same company. I was still doing strategy. I was doing strategy and operations in the US. Same industry, obviously, right? Software. And so the only difference was the market. I was going from North America to Asia Pacific. So by limiting it down to just one pivot point, I had a much better chance of success. Okay, this is a key framework that I encourage everyone to think about whenever you're thinking about a career move. Have a unique value proposition. So, you really do need to, if you want to make an impact and splash and make yourself compelling so the new organization really wants to hire you, you really should bring something new and unique to the table. So what was happening here is, Oracle, as acquires a lot of companies, a lot of smaller software firms. And most of those firms are US firms. Some of them are European firms. Almost never are they outside of those 2 continents. And those small firms, let's say in the US, probably they got snapped up by Oracle because they had some level of success in their home markets, but obviously not enough. Okay. And almost never had they broached other markets. Okay. If they have, good on them. Probably they also, had a UK or, some European country besides the US. So then what happens once these companies come inside a big organization like Oracle or Microsoft? Well, one, there's like a 90-day plan with the M&A integration team. They go through the checklist and, they reshuffle all the people to different teams and, and they have their growth targets and all that. But guess what? If that company that you acquired and all the people were just in the US, so you can shuffle them around as much as you want, but it's going to be focused on the US. It's going to be adding US revenues and adding US people. What about China? What about India? You're probably not going to think about, let's start selling and growing this product in China or India. Okay. Now you're not really going to think about it at headquarters because you've got so much on your 90-day plan to get through. And guess what? The head of China, head of India, they're not going to want it. They're not going to think about it. One, they're not that close to this, what's happened. And then 2, they're afraid of these things. You're trying to tell me, okay, I'm the MD of India. You're trying to tell me to sell this new software product. No one's heard of the company or the brand. Maybe this whole software category doesn't exist yet. Okay. And so not only is it going to be much harder for me to sell $1 of this new stuff versus $1 of a database sales, which everyone knows, but I have to educate the market, right? And I have to set up the partners. I have to train my people. I have to translate stuff. Maybe English is fine for some countries, but not all. So both in the US and in the overseas markets, no one wants to touch this kind of stuff. So what happens? Over several years, companies like Oracle are sitting on all these great products that they acquired that have never really been pushed outside of their home countries, of where the company originally was acquired and operated. So that's a lot of upside potential. So how do you unlock that value? You do it by incubating, right? By setting up an incubation team that can help, land a few key marquee wins at recognized clients, train the field, and do it in such a way so that it's not such a heavy lift for these global markets to start selling the stuff, and it's additional revenue, right? So that was my unique value proposition to Oracle. Another key thing is when you first go out to a market from hopefully the headquarters of the same company, your knowledge and your relationships back to the mothership is going to give you an advantage. So it is very, very key for you to maintain that and not let that stagnate. It'll naturally stagnate because people change jobs, okay, back at headquarters, and because you're going to be far away, out of sight, out of mind. But this is one element of power that you have. So this is one area that I didn't do such a good job at. I mean, it got to the point where I remember my dad, who, sometimes your parents can be good mentors too. He said, "Hey, Peter, have you thought about going back to Oracle in the US, to like retrain yourself and whatever?" And at the time, I was having a ball in Hong Kong. It was like Judy was there. So we were having a lot of fun. I love living and working overseas. I would never think of, leaving and going back to the US, right? But now in hindsight, actually, there was a lot of wisdom in that. So there's something to think about. You don't have to physically move, but, you want to make sure you have enough opportunities to keep those ties strong back to headquarters. And also define the playing field in your favor, okay? Don't compete on a commoditized level. What I mean here is I moved to Asia Pacific in an APAC role for Oracle, but I've had plenty of opportunities that I was offered roles that focused on Greater China, which is mainland Macau, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. But I always stayed away from those. Even if they were like good positions, I never considered taking those. Why? Because I knew that if I was going to focus on just Greater China, I'm not going to be as good, in terms of my relationships and networks, as someone who actually went to high school in China, went to college in China, and has most of their career been in China. They're going to have an advantage over me, right? So I always define my competitive theater in terms of career roles at the Asia Pacific level, because someone could be a superstar in one market like China, but the minute you throw in India or Korea or Japan into that, they're not going to be as strong. And the unique thing about, I think, coming from the US, and especially, I think the more diverse, coasts of the US, is, we are programmed to operate, more naturally from a young age in a multicultural environment than a lot of, our contemporaries that grew up in other countries. Okay, now I'm generalizing. Okay, so obviously there's many exceptions, but just remember, you never want to get into a position where you're not going to be able to be much stronger at doing something, at serving your markets than many other people. And by the way, many of the other folks that you would compete with, let's say in China, and I knew this going in, is like, for every one of me, there's probably 10 similarly educated and experienced folks that have only worked in China, that's willing to, or whatever country, okay, that's willing to work for a fraction of what I was making. Okay, now obviously things have changed. China, it's gotten quite expensive, as well, and its economy is very strong. But whatever country, just keep that in mind. You never want to be competing with folks who are willing to work for 1/5 of your salary, right? So the way you avoid that is you cover a large enough region that they cannot compete against you because they have no experience outside of, say, Greater China. Finally, make sure you work a few years in the US first, because a US education and a US work experience is valued globally, okay? So it's much better that you get some of that, and then you can basically elevate yourself to more of a expat pay range as opposed to just a local pay range, okay? So observations while working abroad. One of the things I learned early during my stint in Australia is this thing called the tall poppy syndrome. You've probably heard it. It's not unique to Australia, but it's basically the opposite of what Will Rogers says in the US, that it ain't bragging if it's true. All right. So I think that statement by Will Rogers is very American, right? And I think I would say proudly so. Okay, but not all cultures, not all countries would necessarily have the same perspective. So the tall poppy syndrome in Australia meant you have a field of poppies, and if one grows too tall, guess what's going to happen to that one? It's going to get chopped. Now, I'm not saying that it's always going to be like this, okay? But that's where, it was actually another American who got transplanted to Australia who sort of explained this to me, and something to think about. Maybe you don't want to always be the person who, it probably works in the US too. You don't want to always be the one that's, always putting yourself out there. You do want to serve with humility and be a team player. But there are differences in how different cultures view individual contribution recognition and the importance of that versus that of sort of group harmony. Resistance to change. That's something that I noticed right off the bat when I transferred with Oracle. If you live and work in the US, you're used to operating in a large economy. You're used to having a lot of opportunities for your career. Okay. Just go look on LinkedIn, look at all the jobs that are open. Okay. And look at, some of them sound pretty good, I'm sure. But if you're from a smaller country, sorry, let me drink some. Let's say you're the managing director of Indostan, a country that I just made up. Not a huge country, okay? You're managing director of Oracle in Indostan. You're already pretty much, you're near the top of your game, okay? Oracle's a well-known company, or Microsoft or Amazon, Google. You're the managing director, okay? That's a nice job. And there's not going to be a whole lot of other jobs, like that at that level in your country with that prestige and that pay. So are you going to be as amenable to changes? Let's say headquarters comes in and say, hey, we want to do this new model where, we have these acquired companies that's being managed by APAC, and they're going to help you grow this business in your country, and then, we're going to spin off this other unit. So, the managing director is not going to have any of that, because basically anytime there's change, it risks disrupting the good thing that they have going on. Okay. I think in the US, because we have so many opportunities is abundant, frankly, I think we're a little more amenable to change, because, if something doesn't quite work out, there's always some other opportunity, and you can always change companies, whatnot. So that's something to keep in mind, resistance to change. Trust versus transparency. So, I've heard stereotypes where if you go to other countries, people might hire based on nepotism, or they just want, they just want to hire their buddies, and it's not like a meritocracy as it is maybe in Silicon Valley or the US, if you believe that, okay? But let's believe that for now. But the thing is, you have to realize that a lot of these other economies, a lot of these other markets and countries, they don't have the same legal systems. They don't have the same level of transparency and again, career opportunities. So that if I'm, a manager and I've had my team with me for some time, okay, I'm probably going to keep that team with me wherever I go because I can trust them. I know they're not the sharpest, tools in the shed, but at least I can trust them. And why is trust so much more important than maybe hiring the best in their practice? Is because if someone does, for lack of a better word, backstab you, you may not have the same legal recourses, okay, as you would in the US. Okay, so think about that. It's all perspective. So I would not fault anyone for hiring B players instead of A players because they've worked and trusted those B players, again, out like in different markets. Okay, I would not fault people for that because in that environment, it is more important to have people that you can trust versus the best people. I know it's a hard pill to swallow because, I think in the US, where, we probably sue too much, okay, but there is legal protections and transparency. It's, we're always trained to really, look for the best, right? So to hire A players instead of B players. So that's one difference I noticed. And also working cross-functionally doesn't quite work too well because people are so used to working with their bosses or their teams that it's like hard for people to think about, okay, well, why are you talking to this other boss, right? I'm your boss. So matrix reporting doesn't work as well. It probably doesn't work as well in the US either, but worse, so I say overseas. Importance of partnerships in government. That goes without saying. I think if I had more time, I'd dive deeper. And then again, there's differences in business culture and risk appetite. So I've noticed that actually folks from the US tend to be very optimistic, like we're probably a little overly aggressive in what we think we can accomplish, okay? Which is not a bad thing, right? Like a lot of things, maybe, the US wouldn't have put the first man on the moon if, we sort of didn't have this ambition, for lack of a better word. But, whereas if you look at Japan and Korea, people are much more hesitant to overpromise or, to be overly optimistic because there's such a penalty, I think, for failing and not delivering what you said you would do, because everything is, the quality is very important. You want to not only deliver, you want to deliver it to the highest quality standards. So that what I've noticed is when I try to push initiatives in Korea, for example, the local team is very hesitant, okay, because they may feel there's not enough time to prepare and do a good job, okay? Whereas in India and China, like, yeah, okay, we'll give it the old college try, okay? We'll just go ahead and charge for it and we'll do it. But then what I would notice that when Japan or Korea does agree to do something, by God, when they execute it, it is like fantastic. It's the best. It's such a good job, okay? Whereas maybe some of the other countries, there's some shortcuts and, it's a little kludgy. So it's very interesting to be able to watch these things. And, you definitely don't want to think, though, why is this team in this country, why are they always so pessimistic, or why are they, reluctant? It's because, that's sort of that's the norm over there, right? And there's pluses and minuses of that, right? You do want to under promise and over deliver. That's a good thing, okay? So that's enough on this slide. Anecdotes, I think I'm already over the hour, so I don't want to overstep the time bounds too much. Let me quickly go into this slide. I think final thoughts on pursuing global career. Okay, advantages of living and working overseas. These are life-defining experiences. So I would not, trade the experience that I've gotten living and working overseas, for anything. It expands your career horizons. Okay, it opens more doors for you. You'll be considered for global positions, whereas others, may say, "Hey, I'm interested," but they may not be seriously considered because they've not demonstrated that track record before. You can really stand out professionally and personally, okay? And then depending on the countries, you may be able to afford a live-in nanny, enjoy free healthcare. I mean, there's all kinds of benefits, but there's usually trade-offs too. Like maybe you have to give up the 2-car garage, and live in a small space, okay? But there are also some very, very serious pitfalls that, people may not talk about, but I want to be truthful and make sure your eyes are open going in. If you're married, if you're in a committed relationship, you really have to think about your spouse, okay? Because there is nothing worse than having a trailing spouse resent you for the rest of your life and his or her life because they gave up a really good career, not just a job career in the US to follow you. So just think about that. If you're not careful, you could get pigeonholed, okay? So I've had friends that work in private equity in China, but private equity in VC, well, mainly private equity in China is so different than private equity elsewhere that basically it was very hard for him to parlay that same industry experience to other private equity companies that were based in the US because they kept saying, "Oh, okay, he's a Chinese specialist. He's a China guy," right? And then you'll never get the home court advantage. I mentioned this earlier. I'm never going to be as good, selling in China as someone who, let's say whatever the Berkeley equivalent there is, so Tsinghua or something, right? I didn't go to high school in China. I don't speak one of the local dialects. So it's like, if you do all those, if you speak Shanghainese and you're in Shanghai, you're going to have an advantage, even over Beijingers, right? So forget about Asian Americans. And finally, repatriation can be very tough. Okay, that's everyone says that, but you can always ping me if you ever get to that stage, and I can maybe give you some more color to that. Repatriation, especially if you're older, coupled with ageism, that could be a killer too. So just be careful on these things as you think about international career. So what I'll do is let me pause here, okay? And John, if we want, I'm going to leave this slide up, right? This is about pandemic pivots. If people want to ask questions about what I presented or about, this is sort of outlined for the pandemic pivot section, anything related to these bullets, I'll be happy to. And then of course, I can also answer some more questions during the networking session. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks a lot, Peter. If you have our question and answer period is somewhat flexible. So if you want to go into really quickly on the pandemic pivots, spend about five minutes or so. Maybe you can highlight some of the presentation, and then we can go to Q&A.
Okay. Well, again, I'd love to tell you a quick story about Zika and my current company, not to try to, sell anything, but we literally had to pivot many times. So Zika had a location-based app, okay, on Play and App Store at the end of 2019. It was fairly successful. It was starting to get a lot of SaaS subscriptions from, retail businesses, food and beverage, stores that sold stuff, not necessarily consumable or drinkable, even event venues and service businesses, because the app would allow them to promote their business to people, who happen to be near the region, because this is location-based technology. And you can then see their engagement. You can even tell when people have actually visited your store physically, because we set up the, without installing any IoT stuff, we can basically track if people have entered your store. That all went away when COVID started shutting down stores, and our customers no longer had money to pay us. So we pivoted into what we call digital, digital and physical. It's actually a word coined by a Bain partner. And the way we did that is we helped our retail businesses continue to get a revenue stream through live streaming that had a physical component. So a sushi restaurant would have the chef live stream their sushi making lesson, and then we would not only produce the live stream, but then we would handle the logistics of shipping a box of the ingredients so people can follow at home. That was very well received, but it was not profitable, because you can imagine retail was already a thin margin business. You add on logistics, you add on live stream production costs, and people don't have big budgets during the pandemic. So we said, okay, this is an interesting model. Let's take it more uptown to larger businesses instead of mom and pop shops, so that we can actually make some money. So we started taking it to nonprofit organizations and for-profit companies that relied on their annual fundraising gala that they can no longer run in a pandemic. They relied on their trade show that they can no longer host because people can't travel and you can't gather. And so we started doing, producing the live stream, and a lot of nonprofits latched on, because nonprofits have limited resources. They have no idea how to do a live stream. Okay. And they need the money to raise the money to fund their business. And because they also don't need to rent a hotel or have any physical costs related to a live stream, the net of it was the money that they raised plus the cost savings by doing a live stream ended up giving them the same, if not more, funds from their fundraising event. So now we've been successful at doing this. We've also started being a value-added reseller for Gather and Remo and other virtual worlds, because a lot of these live streams also have a virtual networking component to it. Meanwhile, all this time, we've been reinvesting in adding live streaming capabilities to our original location-based app. So it's important to pivot to survive and thrive and grow if you can, but also if you really can, invest in your original value proposition, right? Because to some extent, the world will return to some sense of pre-COVID normalcy, but it'll be a hybrid model. And that's why when our new app comes out next month, it'll have both the live stream capability as well as the location-based, so that online or offline, whichever stage of opening or closing you're in, retail businesses can engage with their customers. So that's sort of one, in a nutshell, the pivots that Zekin has done. And here's one case study where we did a large fundraiser. It raised about $2 million, okay, in one night for a collection of private schools in Fulcrum Foundation. And you can see here, this virtual ballroom is a Remo environment. So people can go and sit at the tables, they can see each other, they can hop from table to table, floor to floor. And then we can also, during the keynote sessions, have the kids, play their live stream video, have Martell, who's the NBA, former NBA star, give his message, etc. We also did the holiday office party for Apple. We created, this time it's in a virtual world platform called Gather. Some of you may have had experience with. And then we design it to be really fantastical, okay? And we hire performance artists to also, be in the world, in the avatar, and engage with people. And it's just like in the real world. When you walk up to someone, you'll see them, you can chat with them like you're hearing me now. And then, the difference is right now you can't walk away. You're sort of stuck in the Zoom environment, but in this Gather environment, you can, just walk away and the person will fade away. And then the final application is working from home. So these are all the issues that, according to a recent survey, people working from home have cited. And the biggest issue is technology, communication, lack of social interaction. And we use a virtual world environment to create a virtual office. And then we provide, all these benefits. So if you think about Zoom, right? We're probably going to do the networking session later, right? The drawback with Zoom happy hours or networking sessions is, from my experience, is sometimes they're commandeered by one or two extroverts who are always talking, and then the rest of us just like they're listening, right? And we're sort of stuck because we can't really go to another room until the moderator, rotates, right? Rotates the breakouts. So that's a drawback for Zoom that these virtual worlds don't have. The other thing is, if you think about your office environment, yes, you can meet people, you can arrange meetings to talk to people. Sometimes, though, it's so much faster just to walk up to a cubicle bank where marketing's sitting and just have a quick, couple of words and a quick update, or a quick pep talk, right, to get the sales team to close the deals, and then just walk away. I mean, you can't do that in Zoom. You have to first make sure everyone's available in their calendar, and you have to send out the invite. It's just so cumbersome that you lose that in the current work from home or even the future hybrid environment. And again, these virtual world solutions like Gather, they allow this, okay? And I had a video to show you about that, but again, I don't want to overstep my time too much. So, John, I'll pause again because you only gave me 5 minutes.
Thanks so much, Peter. Yeah, we have a few questions. I know you had a number of slides that you didn't cover. Was there anything in those slides that you wanted to briefly cover before we get into the questions by the attendees?
Okay, let me see here. All right, so yeah, just for fun. So anecdotes, okay? These are sort of funny things that I picked up my working overseas. So, how do you know when you're about to close a deal in country X? I'm not going to say the country because I don't want to overgeneralize it. But this is a riddle, okay? And the answer is, because all of a sudden the customer introduces this partner that you have to close a deal through, okay, out of the blue, that you've never heard of before, okay? And why is that? It's because if you can sell to the partner, okay, then the partner will sell to the end customer at a much higher price. And then that the buyer for that end customer probably gets a kickback from the partner, okay? So this is very, very sketchy, okay? You definitely have to watch out for it. It doesn't really, technically you're not doing anything wrong, okay? But you sort of know what's happening when this happens. And there's all kinds of shenanigans that happen. I'm not saying this kind of stuff doesn't happen in the US, but it's much, I think it's much less frequent in the US than it is in the emerging countries, okay? So that's number one. Number two, does the government really listen in on my social media posts? And you got WeChat there, and I may be unfairly picking on China, but it's interesting because I think a lot of conversations that I've had with my friends that are from mainland China will also say, Peter, Facebook and Google, they all do the same thing. Like, but at least like in China, we know they're doing it. It's like, at least everyone's eyes is open to the reality. Whereas in the US, you might still think, oh, Apple, Google, Facebook, they're like, they're really protecting my privacy and stuff, right? And so, but but a lot of times you can't prove these things, right? Certainly, it's very hard to prove any of this type of spying stuff in the US. But what I can tell you from my experience in China is we had a strike, okay, in our factories at my last company. And we obviously work with the local government to try to quell the strike because technically it's illegal to strike in the US, okay, to organize demonstrations. And what the government just told us is, hey, give us a list of who you think are the troublemakers, like maybe 20 names. And then what they'll do is they're going to check WeChat, because a lot of times people use WeChat like it's water, okay? Like everything depends on WeChat in China. They're going to check the WeChat forums where people are getting riled up to riling up people to strike, and they're going to see if those people, so they don't monitor the whole thing, but they will monitor specific people that you think are the instigators or the ringleaders of committing an illegal act, right? Which is striking, which is not illegal in the US. So that's how that was part of our way to stop, to stop the strike. So to me, that's clear evidence that there's some amount of ability. I mean, there's definitely, the government has ability to look into what you post. Okay. Now, I've also heard Tencent say with a straight face in front of a large audience in Hong Kong at a forum hosted by The Economist, the chief counsel for Tencent is actually an American. He told us point blank that Tencent never shares any information with the government, like your personal chat information. And so how do I reconcile these two things? So I think technically, I believe, the legal counsel, the general counsel was speaking the truth, his truth. And I think what happens is when it goes over, and I'm not an expert in telecommunications, but I believe what's happening is like China Mobile or the telecom companies is probably able to share the information. If I had to reconcile the two statements, and if I wanted to believe what Tencent said, then it's not Tencent that's sharing the information. It's the mobile network that the information is going through, right? Between handset and handset, so to speak, that's sharing the information. But it is, the government has that capability, because I've seen it happen.
Okay, great.
Yep. So we have enough questions now.
Now let's get a couple quick questions in
All
before
right.
we hit our posted time. We have a question that how competitive can an English-only speaker be in today's global market?
Well, I think in English-speaking countries, very competitive, right? I think again the key is don't only look at one country, look at a region, right? If you have to traverse multiple countries as part of your job, then speaking English is actually the language that you need, right?
Okay, great. And are US citizens still attractive potential hires internationally, given our international image right now?
Yeah, well, I think it's very interesting, and there's a lot of ways I can take this question. I'll be very frank with everyone that it's been tough. I've always looked at myself as I was born in Taiwan, as being a bridge between, let's say Greater China or even Asia, and the US or the West, right? And the last few years, I basically had to see China and America which had a great marriage or courtship for many, many years, break up and get a divorce. And I felt like I was like the child in seeing the two parents break up. So I think, I wouldn't necessarily say that, besides thinking about how the market and how maybe colleagues that are in another country may perceive US citizens, think more about whether, as an American, where you would be more comfortable and operating with maybe these types of perceptions. So I would say that right now it's not a good time to really go gung-ho about China unless you were originally from China. Okay. I think that many of the English-speaking countries, it's the U.S. allies, it's really no problem at all. The large, well-known company experience from the U.S., well-known schools degrees from the U.S. still very much at a premium, okay, and very well respected in other countries. And yeah, I mean, it's tough, it's tough being an American citizen overseas the past few years, because like you constantly feel like I'm embarrassed, right, for what's happening in the US. And it's not as, nice as before, okay, frankly. But if you look at your experience, what you have to offer, right? If you've worked at well-known US brands or come from a well-known US school, that's still gonna help a lot. And just experience in general, even if it's not a brand name, just your experience also matters.
And do you have any tips for finding mentors or developing a brand that would help someone who wants to work internationally?
Yeah. So I think that's finding mentors. I think NAP and other organizations like Committee of 100 and stuff. There's a lot of accomplished people that could serve as mentors, and there's even mentorship programs, right? So I would definitely leverage those, and I did that myself. Okay. The best thing is though to try to find mentors inside your organization, right? And again, you can do that, like John and Judy, when we did when we organized a NAP panel discussion at the Oracle Conference Center, right, many moons ago, I think we had 4 great speakers. And when you organize something like an event like that, you could reach out to those speakers. You form these relationships, and you can reach out to those speakers, and maybe have one of them or 2 of them be your mentors on things. And I would not only look for one, but yeah, you should have like a board, all right, a board of mentors, like a board of directors. And then other resources for living and working overseas. Again, I'm a sort of a conservative guy, so if you follow that four-legged stool framework, just try to find, if you can, opportunities to move from within your company, right? Because your company well, and you can come up with a unique value proposition, a strategy that you can pitch, and may not be your first idea, maybe your 5th idea, that ends up intriguing management enough that they'll seriously consider letting you do an overseas assignment. Sometimes you can also find, especially like in Australia or even European countries, you might find people that are willing to, for some reason, if they want to come to the US, you want to go over there, you guys can also arrange a swap. If larger companies, that's also a possibility.
Okay, that's great. That's great advice. Not only develop your network within your own company, but look to other organizations like ALA, ABL, or NAP to expand your network. And I would assume you would let those people know that you are interested in potentially working overseas and see if there's some way they might be able to mentor you or help you out.
Yeah, they may, know of good organizations where opportunities to work overseas, are more abundant currently. And then, chances are they themselves might have had some experience working overseas, so they can also give you advice that way.
Okay, that's great, Peter. We're coming up right on our 7 o'clock time, which was going to be the end of our networking event.
Okay.
So we'll end the webinar now. For the webinars. Thank you very much on behalf of NAP, ABL, and ALA. Appreciate you spending the time and sharing your knowledge with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
And